Astrophotography has the incredible ability to reveal the glory of the universe around us. But one of the most important parts of this process is actually one of the last things that you'll be doing after you've set up your equipment, captured your images, and stacked them. And that's our post-processing. The question is always raised, what should I use for my final image enhancements? The program that I've been going to for the past several years is called PixInsight. And while it definitely has a steep learning curve, it's been incredible in terms of the faint details and colors that I've been able to get out of deep sky objects. In today's video, we're going to take a look at some of the most useful features of this program by walking through a step-by-step guide on how to use PixInsight. If you enjoy this video, please like it and subscribe to this channel. But most importantly, let me know about how PixInsight works for you or any other software that you use for your photo editing in the comments section below. The final stacked image of the Orion Nebula that we're going to be working with today has been the culmination of several videos that I've made looking at the equipment setup, settings, how to capture the images, and stack it. If you have any interest in seeing those, I'll be sure to tag them in this video and leave a link in the description below. Now let's load up PixInsight and see what we can get out of the great Orion Nebula. As we load up PixInsight, I'd like to start off with the number one question I normally get on astrophotography editing: Photoshop or PixInsight? The easiest answer is both if you can afford it. I cannot afford it, so I decided to go with PixInsight because I appreciated the one-time payment for it. I'm not a personal fan of the subscription model that Adobe has gone for their software over the past few years, but both are fabulous, and you can find wonderful tutorials from astrophotographers on YouTube and other websites that go over how incredible they are both to use. But PixInsight has been my go-to now for several years. I'm very impressed by the free updates that continuously come out for it. So let's get our image loaded up. If this is your first time in PixInsight, this is going to be a little overwhelming, but I'm going to try to break it down to the most useful features that I go into. I consider these features to be in the beginner and intermediate level in terms of PixInsight. But let's get going right into this. I've got a fresh install of it, and let's open up the file we're going to be working with today. We've got our autosave right here that DeepSkyStacker had pumped out of our light, flat, dark, and bias frames, calibrating them and stacking them into this one final image. Let's go over here and right-click and do zoom to fit, make it a little more larger of an image. And we have here a dark image of the Orion Nebula. This is very unimpressive at this point, but this is exactly what you want to see for step one. We can get a little bit of a hint of what's going to come if we go up to the right-hand corner here, click on these arrows, and then if we click on STF Auto Stretch. This has done nothing at this point. This is just stretching it to give a better idea of what's hidden in this image. We can zoom in here and see the Orion Nebula. We can go over here to the left and get some hints of the Flame Nebula and maybe an idea of what I think and hope will be a very nice Horsehead Nebula coming out there. But we can also see a lot of light pollution. And that's one of the things that we're going to want to get rid of as well, that's showing up here, especially in the red spectrum. I'm under Bortle 4, Bortle 5 skies. Dark skies are always the best way to go. Light pollution filters are right after that. Software is what I'm going to be using to hopefully get rid of a lot of this light pollution in this image. We're going to keep this image stretched, but again, we have done nothing just yet. It is still this if we click the X here, but we're going to go back and STF auto stretch it here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up here to process. We're going to go down to Geometry, and we're going to click on Dynamic Crop. I'm going to click here on the image. I'm going to go over here and click this Reset button. So now that we have it all highlighted. When DeepSkyStacker works its magic, it will oftentimes leave imperfections at the extreme edges. We see how we have these black lines here. If we go over here to the left, they're even more prominent. I can even tell with this image the gradient is a little off, and you can tell that the stacking wasn't quite as perfect on the edge, really coming into about this star right here. That may be hard for you to see with this image on YouTube. When you're going in, the first thing you're going to want to do is dynamically crop your image to get a clean image, taking out these imperfections. Sometimes it'll just be a little bit, sometimes it'll have to come in a little more like mine is here. But we want to have a clean image from the center all the way to the extreme edges, or else that's going to throw off a lot of our work later on. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to crop the width of this to 5724. I'm going to crop the height of it to 3720. Again, this is more than I would normally do. For some reason, DeepSkyStacker was a little bit more inaccurate than it normally is with this here. Normally it's just a little bit I have to clip off, but we still have the image that I wanted, which was the center of it being the Orion Nebula, the flame and horse head off to the side, and Orion's belt that we have here with these 3 stars. So everything I wanted is in it, but we're clipping out the imperfections at the edge. We'll go over here and click Execute, and we have completed our first step of PixInsight by dynamically cropping our image. The second thing we're going to do here is honestly why I bought this software. The company and the individual that puts out PixInsight is very generous with the free trials that they give. There are no watermarks. It's a fair amount of time. I went through 1 or 2 of those before I decided to purchase the product, and I would encourage you to do the same. And the thing that sold me on it was this process right here. Let's go up to Process. Let's go down to Background Modulation, and we're going to be doing Background Extraction. Let's start with Automatic Background Extraction. This is maybe what you want to start with if you're brand new to PixInsight, but the results can be a little better if you take more time on it. Default settings for all of this, go down to Target Image Correction, click on Subtraction, and click the box right here. This is going to try to calculate this background of space with your image target with the light pollution to pull it out. If we go over here and stretch this image right here, you can see this is the background that it extracted. This is the light pollution that it's pulling out of it. You can X out of that. This is what is left if we automatically stretch at this point the image. And you can see here, this is a great improvement over what we have right here, just between these two. But I think we can do better if we manually do background extraction. Oh, look at that already. Do a 1-to-1 zoom on that. That is a great improvement already, showing what could be maybe my best shot yet of the Horsehead Nebula. That's beautiful. But we have imperfections here. The software did a good job trying to estimate it, but my skies had a lot of light pollution. Orion was closer to the horizon than I normally shoot it at. I think we can do better than this, but I'm going to keep this as the example of at least what our first attempt looked like. So let's go back up to Process, Background Modulation, and click on Dynamic Background Extraction. From this, we're going to go through and manually extract the light pollution from this image to bring about a remarkable improvement in it. One of the main things that we're going to go down to for this right here is going to be sample generation. So let's click on our image here. So we've got the program locked, loaded, and ready to go with what we're looking at here. For this right here, I normally like to go with around a radius of 10. For the camera I'm using and the sensor I'm using, that tends to yield pretty good results. We're going to do a sample row of around 8. Let's click generate and see what happens. All right. So this is trying to pick out the light pollution, and we have our first generation here of samples. Let's go up here to the tolerance. This is going to tell it pretty much how much light pollution to look for to take out. Not all of the image is covered. You want these marks right here going from one edge to the other. So let's take the tolerance here from 0.5 up to 1.0, and let's click generate again. All right, this is good. We have more of the image being populated, which means it is hunting out more of the brighter light pollution especially. Let's try 1.5 and click generate. Excellent. Looks like every part except for this brightest corner is currently covered. Let's try 1.7. That still doesn't get it. Let's try 1.9. There we go. So now from the brightest corner to the dimmest corner, we have it hunting for the light pollution at a radius size of 10 with sample rows of 8. Now the next thing we need to do for this is quite time consuming. So I'm actually going to fast forward a little bit through this part once I get started on it. We have to go into every single one of these samples to make sure it is not overlapping with a star. If you click on this blue arrow here, it'll actually take you right to it. So we're going to want to zoom in a lot. Click the blue arrow. It takes us to number 1. I can see here number 1 has no star in it, so we're good. I'm going to click on number 2. Click the blue arrow. This one's on a star. So all I'm going to do here is shift this over to where a star is not, which is about right there. For the third sample, we've got a more dim star here, but we're still going to not want to have that on it. So let's move that up there. All right, let's fast forward through this part, and then I'm going to come back in just a second to move on to the next part. So let's take a look at this one as we finish this up. We're on one of the brightest corners of this image. And we can see here that there's still light pollution that hasn't been taken out. Sometimes that's fine, sometimes I still like to get rid of it. Let's take this up to 2.0 and just click enter. Don't go back and click generate, just click enter. Still a little bit of light pollution. Let's do 2.1 and again just click enter. All right, so that cleared up all the light pollution for that. Let's go finish this up. Again, just making sure that we don't have any of these sample boxes over any stars or any parts of our deep sky objects or nebulosity. We only want it to extract the light pollution that we don't want in this image. As I go back here to double check some things, let's double check the Horsehead Nebula and the Flame Nebula. Looks like there's nothing around that. We're probably good here with the Orion Nebula, but sometimes that faint nebulosity can come out quite a bit farther. So I'm actually going to take these 3 that are closest to it and move them just a little bit more away from it, making sure that we're not hitting any stars along the way. Probably not necessary, but just playing it safe in terms of how far out some of the fainter nebulosity was that I may or may not have caught. All right, so we have 54 of our samples. We've gone through and looked at all of them. We've got all of this ready to go. Let's go down here to Target Image Correction, click on Subtraction, and let's click the green arrow right here to execute. That was quick. Let's go over here and do a sample stretch of what we're looking at here. We see the light pollution that was removed. Let's take a look at our results right now for this first major step. That is incredible, and that is why I bought this software. Comparing it to the auto. Again, auto is perfectly fine to use if you're new to this. If this is something that you're overwhelmed with early on, I used auto background extraction for a very long time. But you do see here the difference in what you get out of it. Let me go ahead and X out a dynamic background extraction. I know I'm done with it. Click yes to that. We have here a much cleaner image, a much more uniform correction. We zoom in here on the Orion Nebula. We go over here to the left, to the Horsehead Nebula. Just a cleaner, more uniform image for us to work with. So I'm going to X out of the one that was auto, but I'm going to keep obviously the one that was dynamic background extraction where we did it manually. Let's go in here real quick and right click and go to identifier. This is a small thing to do, but I like to do it early on. Let's go ahead and rename this. Let's rename this the Orion Nebula. And I'm going to keep this original file. Always good to keep those things. Don't X out of that. So this is what we are working with for the remainder of our tutorial today. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go work on the color and work on neutralizing the background to give us even more contrast and depth and accuracy to the colors of the Orion Nebula, Flame Nebula, and Horsehead Nebula. So let's go up here to Process. We're going to go down to Color Calibration. And we're going to go to Photometric Color Calibration. This is one I was not aware of until recently, but I love this program in it. This basically takes the real world data that we have of what these objects actually emit in terms of their color that we perceive and see with our eyes. And it takes the stacked image that we're working with here and calibrates the image to be more accurate to how it looks in the real world. It uses the real data that we have, scientific data, and then takes the image from your camera to make it more accurate in terms of the color and the background. It's a really, really unique tool that I love using in PixInsight. We're going to keep almost all of this in terms of default, but we are going to go up here to search coordinates because it has to know what we're looking at in the sky. It has to know what we're looking at in terms of that. So we're going to do M42, which is kind of the core center of what we're looking at here. We're going to click Get. So that has brought up the coordinates for that. So now the program knows what part of the sky we took a picture of. And now we have to put in a little bit of info about our camera, about our equipment. I shot this at 135 millimeters, and the pixel size for my camera is 3.7. You can look that up on Google for your camera, DSLR, imaging sensor to see what it is. But 135 was my focal length, 3.7, excuse me, for my pixel size. Again, all of this is default, which I'm very thankful for because this is a very complicated tool, but we don't have to do too much with it. We're going to have it neutralize the background color as well. And we're going to go down here and click on this box to apply it to this image. All right, we have finished with this part of the process. I'm not quite sure what these lines mean, but I'm assuming it's a good thing. So we're going to X out of that, and we're going to go over here and X out of this as well. And we have here the image. You can go right up here to kind of the before and after, and it shows you what it did. The colors starting to come through of the Orion Nebula, a lot more of a pop to the Horsehead Nebula, the background sky neutralized. Photometric color calibration is an excellent tool to use early on in this process. But again, this is not what this image looks like. This is still what it looks like. We have just been going over here and using this STF auto stretch function to help us see what we were doing in these early steps. We have not stretched this image yet at all. So let's click the X button here and let's make this look more like we want it to look by actually beginning the process of stretching it to bring out those faint, incredible details. Because right now, that's about all I can see of the Orion Nebula. And I don't know about you, but I want to get a little more out of it than that for the time that I've put into this. So let's stretch it. Let's go up here to Process. Let's go down to Intensity Transformations. And let's go to Histogram Transformation. We have this chart that comes up here. We need to click on the Orion Nebula, which is what we're using. And we're going to go over here and click on Real-Time Preview so that we can see the impact that we're having as we're working towards this. Let's take this middle bar right here and let's pull it over to the left to begin to stretch the image. And you will slowly start to see the Orion Nebula, the Flame Nebula, and the Horsehead Nebula come to life. So the question always is, how much should it be stretched to? There's no one answer for this. You do not want to go to the extreme of this where it's this, because that's obviously not naturally how this image would look. But you also don't want it to be too dim. So you've got to find a middle ground of what is appropriate for what you imaged and, in my opinion, natural to how it should look. This is very much when you get into the artistic side of astrophotography. So I've got the midtones at about 0.004, and I can probably go ahead and bring in the shadows here just a bit. You don't want to clip out too much of anything early on because that would end up being data that you would potentially lose. But I think I can go ahead and get maybe, yeah, if I'm only losing 0.0115 of pixels, that's not too bad. So for an initial stretch, and sometimes you'll go back and do this several times, I'm happy with how this is. So let's X out of our preview, and let's go over here and click Apply for what we have. And there you go. We have a much more impressive, and I would say beautiful image of the Orion Nebula. So for now, we're done with histogram transformations, so I'm going to go ahead and X out of that. At this point in the process, we have taken out the light pollution. We have corrected the color, neutralized the background, and we have here a much improved image already of the constellation Orion, but I think we can do even better than this. Let's focus on noise reduction right now. So let's go up to Process, go down to Noise Reduction. There are several of these you can use. I prefer using ACDNR. What I'm going to do for this here is I'm going to click on the lightness mask, And then I'm going to go down here and try to have a preview of what this is going to take out or mask in terms of the lightness. I'm going to focus here on the midtones, and I'm going to bring this down to, that's too far. Yeah, I'm going to try to have this mask protect the nebulosity of the Orion Nebula in particular, while getting rid of noise in the dark background of space. So that should work pretty well for that. One thing that would be good to do at this point is create a preview window. So let's click on that, and let's just preview this middle portion here of the Orion Nebula. Let's unclick that. And then let's click preview again of just this preview window. So now we're just looking at what impact this noise reduction is going to have on the Orion Nebula. Let's go up here to STD-DEV. And let's play around with this a little bit. Let's move it just down to basically nothing and see what happens. Let's move it up to its highest setting of 10 and see what happens. All right, and this may be hard for you to see on YouTube, but it is very, very smooth now with the background of space. But going this far, it's almost unnaturally smooth. I actually like a little bit of grain in my images of space, almost going back to when we used to shoot with film, although that was a little bit before my time. But you also lose some of the difference between the background of space and the nebulosity of the object that you're imaging. You don't want your object to lose its detail when you're going through here to remove some of the noise. In the preview that we have here, we can click to turn the preview on and off to show the difference in the background that we have and the noise reduction that's going on there. Let's shift this up a little bit higher. Go over here again to our preview, turning it on and off to see what we have. It's all a balancing act in terms of wanting the background of space to be smooth but not too smooth, but also not losing the details of the object that we're imaging and working with tonight. So I think for ACDNR, what we're looking at here is perfectly good. STD-DEV of 3.5, lightness mask on. Everything else I'm going to pretty much keep to default here. So let's go in first to our image of the preview and click box here. Yeah, that's excellent. If you press Control, Shift, and Z, you can kind of turn the effect on and off. Again, that's Control, Shift, Z. Off, on. It's a subtle but a good improvement, just cleaning up the background of space. So let's take this and get rid of this preview for right now. Let's take this to our whole image and let's click on Apply. All right, ACDNR has gone through and it has smoothed out the background of space, creating a much more pleasing image, but it has not, thankfully, smoothed out the details of the Orion Nebula or the Flame or Horsehead Nebula. So it did its job with what we wanted, smoothing out, removing the noise, especially in the background of space. So let's X out of this right here. And we're now going to move to a step called multi-scale processing. This is a really important tool for something like the Orion Nebula, but it is not something that I use for every single image of astrophotography. It's going to try to tamp down on this bright overexposed core to bring out more of the details that weren't blown out by the exposure length. Again, for a bright object like this, it's effective. I don't use this every single time. If you're an advanced user of PixInsight, you're going to want to use a star mask and a background mask for this, but I'm not going to get into masking for much of this tutorial because I consider that to be a little more advanced than I want to go to with what we're looking at here. So let's click on Process, and let's go to Multiscale Processing. And let's go to HDR Multiscale Transform. All right. So for this right here, we're going to want to click for it to be to the lightness. We're also going to want to have a lightness mask. So let's go through and experiment with what this is going to do in particular by just clicking on the Apply button right here with the settings that we currently have. Well, there you go. If we zoom in and see what we have here, we can click the back button and then forward, and we see the effect that we wanted. It has brought a more natural look to the core of the Orion Nebula. Let's take this, let's go back to what we were working with, and let's click on this at level 5 for number of layers. That's what I'm talking about. That's an excellent, excellent improvement. And I think that's what I'm going to stick with. That is beautiful, faint nebulosity. It looks like I didn't blow out too much of the interior core here. So I think number of layers being at 5 is exactly what I want for this. Just to make sure I didn't do anything else with this that I didn't want to get rid of, let's do the undo button here just to see. We lost a little bit of brightness in some of the brightest stars, but that's worth it for what we're looking at here. Before, after. That is a gorgeous Orion Nebula that we're working towards. So we have killed some of the overexposure of the interior core of the Orion Nebula. And now we're going to go over here and X out of that. And we are going to click on Process. We're going to go back down to Noise Reduction. And we're going to click on SCNR. Now what does this do? This removes green from the image. Green is apparently not a very natural color in astrophotography. And normally any type of green that you have is going to be from your pixels of your camera and not from the image of space. So this is a quick, easy step. All I do is keep these default settings. I press Apply, and the extra green is removed from the image. Sometimes it's noticeable, in this one it really wasn't, but SCNR, to remove the green, can help to clean up the images a little bit for what we're going to do for our next step, which is an exciting one, and that deals with color saturation. Let's go here to Process, and we're going to go down to Intensity Transformations, and we're going to go to Curves Transformation here. Let's recreate that preview window of the Orion Nebula that we were looking at earlier. And for Curves Transformation, let's click on the preview here for real time. All right, so now we see what we're looking at. Let's go over here and click on Saturation. So that's all we're working with this. And let's play around with this line right here to see what we can do in terms of the Orion Nebula. That is a big improvement in color. If we click Reset right here, that should take it back to what it was. So this is bringing this to life in a pretty impressive way, and the stars as well. This is one of those things, again, that is artistic taste, kind of like stretching it. In my opinion, this is not a natural looking image. You're starting to get the black background of space be purples and blues. That's not a natural looking image. What I've typically tried to do is move this arrow up this line as far as I can while keeping the curve of it within this entire box. So whenever too much of this line gets cut off up here, that's probably too much. But if it's a natural curve that goes from one corner to the other and just bows a little bit, that's normally what I'm looking for. This takes the color out. This adds it to it. That's good. I'm pleased with that. So we're going to go over here, X out of our preview, go back to our image in general, and get rid of this preview again. And let's click on Apply for the entire image. That is excellent. Oh, that's beautiful. The core of the Orion Nebula now visible, the colors coming out of it. And look at this right here. How much that brought to life. If we go back to this undo and redo before and after, how much that brings to life the Horsehead Nebula in particular. That is beautiful. Just from a simple correction of curves transformation. If you were under dark skies, and if I didn't have the level of light pollution you would see red nebulosity. This would be a very dense region of space. But from where I live in my light pollution, getting this is a treat. Even these stars are just looking beautiful with their white and blue color tone. That's excellent. So let's X out of that. Now we're getting into the final couple steps here, some final things that we're going to do. And I said earlier we weren't going to do much with masking stars or the background of space, which is true, but there is one type of mask that I want to show you that I think is a really important one for what we're working with here today to bring out some details in certain parts of this image. And we're going to go here to Mask Generation, and we're going to go to Range Selection. And we're going to click Preview in real time. So a mask is a way of telling the program what to work with or not to work with. Sometimes you want a mask to only show your object. Sometimes you want it to only show stars or the background of space. We want this mask to only focus on the objects that we want to work with in these last few steps of sharpening the details, specifically of the Orion Nebula. So I'm going to go here to lower limit, and I'm going to just kind of move this up. And this starts to show you how when it covered everything versus now only the brightest objects that we have. The question always is, how much should you make it? And this is a judgment call on your end. I think for this today, focusing here especially on the Horsehead Nebula, I believe 0.17 is going to work well for me. You're going to want to go down here to Smoothness, and you're going to want to smooth this so there are kind of natural gradients and a smooth way that this is eased out of it in terms of what you're processing. I'm going to probably do this around 10. So lower limit 0.17, smoothness 10. Let's X out of our real-time preview, and let's create our first mask in this tutorial today. And there we go. We can X out of this tool right now. So now we have a mask. We have the image we've been working with in a mask that mainly just has the bright parts of it shown. The Orion Nebula, Flame Nebula, Horsehead Nebula, some of our brighter stars, but that's okay. To activate this mask, we're going to click on this and drag it over. Then we're going to release. At this point, let's minimize this, but don't delete it, just minimize it. Now we can see what is the program going to be focusing on for this last step, which is to sharpen, hopefully, the Orion Nebula and to sharpen some different things over here, but especially the Orion Nebula. You can choose to keep this on. You can keep the mask enabled but not show it. I'm going to turn the mask off, but you go up here to mask and you can show mask or not show mask. And this leads us to the part of sharpening this image, one of our final steps today in this tutorial for PixInsight and the Orion Nebula. Let's go up to Process. Let's go to Convolution, and let's go to Unsharp Mask, an old reliable tool of PixInsight. So let's go into here, and for the third time today, let's create a preview of the Orion Nebula, because that really is the main thing we're worried about sharpening here to bring out some structural detail of this here. Let's click on the real-time preview button for the Orion Nebula, and here we already see the effects of what's going on. We see here what happens if this is slid all the way to the left, not much at all. All the way to the right, way too sharp. Way too much of an effect there. But you can see that our mask is working because the only thing in this image that is being impacted is really the core of the brightest part of the Orion Nebula, none of the dark background of space. So for this image that I have here today, I'm going to go through here and make this about 2.5. But I think we could lighten up a little bit on what we have here in terms of the impact on it. So I'm going to take the amount down to 0.75. But this isn't looking as good as I was hoping, to be honest with you. So I'm going to try, let me try to de-ring it. And this may be a side effect of not doing a star mask with it, because some of the stars are looking a little weird here. If we go to de-ringing and it's set to 0.1 default, I think that cleaned it up pretty well. Let's turn that off and see what happened again. Yeah, that's excellent. So that's what was bothering me about it. So some of the interior stars and brighter stars looked over-processed, but clicking on de-ringing really makes them look more natural. Yeah, that's what was throwing me off on that. So here we have the sharpened version of the Orion Nebula. Let's click it to this preview right here. Let's do Control-Shift-Z to see the subtle difference back and forth. I'm very pleased with that. This again is an artistic judgment call. Some of you may think I should sharpen it some more. Some of you may think I've sharpened it too much. To my eye and for my taste, this is a sharpening of the Orion Nebula that still rings true to images I've seen of it and what I imagine of it in my mind when I look at it through a telescope, even if I'm not seeing all of these colors and faint details from a long exposure. So let's go back here. We can delete this preview again. And let's do Unsharp Mask with our mask turned on, protecting the background of space to this entire image with these settings. And there we have it. Just to make sure it did what it did, we click back. We click it again. Beautiful Orion Nebula. We go over here to the Flame and Horsehead Nebula. And again, we see a good amount of sharpening, bringing out some more definition of both of those. And that is I'm very, very happy with that Horsehead Nebula. This was my longest exposure of the Orion Nebula in this part of space. Very, very pleased with how that turned out. At this point, we are done with our mask, so we can keep it over here in case we needed it for later to go back at any point. But I'm going to go up to mask and I'm going to turn it off right now. So I'm going to turn it off, and that goes from kind of a dark orange back to the normal color of gray. So right now the mask is saved for later use if I needed to, but it is no longer activated. And we have one final step, and that is some final calibrations to the background of space to darken it just a little bit. We're going to go back to intensity transformations. We're going to go back one more time to histogram transformation. And you can see here all the work that we've done so far. All the work that we've done so far in this image has moved the histogram over to the right. Everything from adjusting the color to getting rid of noise to what we just did with the Unsharp Mask. All of these effects have changed this a good little bit. So we can take this right here. Let's click preview so we can see what we're doing. And we can darken the background of space to make this image pop even more. Let's take this to about 0.078 for our shadows. With that, we have only clipped off 0.0140 of our pixels. That's not bad. Again, you may have a personal taste of clipping it more, clipping it less, but for me right here today, to my eye, that is a beautiful, natural looking background of space. You do not want the background of space to be pitch black, because it is not. You want there to be some level of brightness to even your darkest pixel. As to what that is, that comes down to your taste, to your imaging equipment, but you don't want your background to be like this because that is unnatural. There should be a bit of a flow between the background of space and the nebulosity of the object that you're imaging. And for me today, that's about 0.078 in terms of shadows. I think I can even brighten this a little bit though, and I don't always do this, but if we go over here to midtones, I think I can even pull this a little bit more back this way to stretch this a little more. Yeah, that makes it pop a little more. So we've brightened the brightest objects a little bit, and we've clipped the background of space. Let's go here, X out of our preview, and let's click apply for this final step. Now that we've completed the final step of this extensive process, we're going to go in and save the final file of this image. Let's go up to File right here, go down to Save As. We have the original autosave right here. And let's just go down and save this as Orion Nebula. I like to save it as a TIFF file originally because that is a format that's going to keep a lot of the information in it if you want to go back and do further edits later on, even years down the road if you want to go back and mess around and try to add and bring out more details to things. So we'll click Save here. It's all right that that comes up. We'll click OK on that. I've had difficulty saving this for some reason to 32 bits, so I typically save it as a 16-bit unsigned integer. I keep everything else under default, and then I'll click OK for that. I also like to go up and save versions of this that I can post onto different websites and to save it as different file formats. So I'll also go up and save it as a JPEG file. Now you'll lose a lot of the fine information with it. You won't be able to go back and add or edit more to this file, but I think it's still good to save it as this just to post on social media. So I'll click Save here. A warning again, all that's okay. Push the quality up to 100%. Click OK. And there you go. After hours and hours of time spent on this, from setting up my equipment, to finding the object, to capturing light, dark, flat, and bias frames, taking those into DeepSkyStacker, and now finally bringing out incredibly faint details and remarkable colors using PixInsight. Every single step of the process is why I love astronomy and astrophotography. What we have the ability to do and to reveal of the glory of our universe is unparalleled in any other hobby. I hope you found this tutorial on PixInsight helpful. If there's any software that you use beyond this, or any techniques in PixInsight that I don't know about currently that can make this image even more incredible, please be sure to let me know and others in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for your continued support, and clear skies from Late Night Astronomy.